Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Our guest today is Bobby Casey from businessanywhere.io. Bobby, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Vance, thanks for having me today. Looking forward to this. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this as well. I'm very excited to have you because we do a lot of the same thing with kind of different positioning. Obviously, we've taken a Latin American angle to it, but we both service the same market, which is location independent, digital nomads, global founders, people working online, making money online, helping them set up their online business and so forth. Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sure, I've been in this space a long time. I personally, I've always been an entrepreneur, so I've always been in the entrepreneurial world. I've actually never had a real job. I've never, I say a real job. I've had jobs, but I've never had a professional job. I've always had my own company. So, I started my first real company when I was 19. So I haven't really had a real job my whole adult life. And I've always been location independent. Even in my 20s and early 30s, I had a company with a lot of employees all over the country. I had an office with 20 employees. And then I had employees all over the U.S. too. And even then, I had an office and I never went to the office. I still was location independent. I worked from home or worked on the road, whatever. So for me, being location independent is like a fundamental core value of the way I operate. And even to the point where I started my last couple of companies, I built them to be location independent for me, but also for my team, because I look at it like this. I really want my employees and my team to have a good quality of life. So I like for them to also work remotely. I like, you got a mom who has kids and wants to go have a 2-hour lunch with her kids in school. I want her to have the ability to do that. I want my people to be able to have kind of a free lifestyle like that. So I'm very big in the location independent movement. I've been full-time, let's call it, quote, digital nomad since way longer than that term has existed.
Random question. Are you related to Doug Casey?
I have no relation to Doug Casey, but I do know him. We know each other, and he actually, let me do the math here. He is exactly the right age to be my dad. Let's put it like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do know Doug. I've hung out with Doug before. Doug and I share a lot of the same views, a lot of the same perspectives, but yeah, no actual, not that I know of anyway, no actual relation that I'm aware of. I mean, we both have the same last name, which means we're both originally from the same region of Ireland, or at least somebody in our ancestry is from the same region of Ireland. So I don't know, maybe if you go back 20 generations, maybe we're related somehow.
Okay, just checking. I'm sure the audience is probably curious too.
Cool. Yeah, he's a good guy though. I like Doug. He's a good dude. Smart guy.
Cool. I'm Irish American as well. Okay, so the podcast today is primarily for non-Americans, right? That's your primary audience, is working with Canadians, Europeans, Australians, everybody else except Americans.
No, we have a lot of Americans. So our company, my bigger business, let's say, I'm an international tax lawyer. I've been doing tax consulting for location independent entrepreneurs for 20 plus years. And my main business now, though, is an offshoot of my tax consulting practice, which is businessanywhere.io. And so we are U.S. focused in the sense that we do all the things for startups, like U.S. company formation, registered agent service, virtual mailboxes, bank account openings, bookkeeping, tax filings, compliance, all that. So it's U.S. focused. So we have lots of American clients, but we also have lots of non-American clients. I mean, we have clients probably in 100 plus countries at this point.
Yeah, kind of the same with me. Is Americans need company formations, obviously. but international people, they kind of need it more in the US market. Or what I mean by more is an American can kind of go to anyone. They can go to wyomingagents.com or whatever it is. But an international person, they need a little bit of expertise uh, kind of packaged together with, it's not just LLC formation. They need the expertise too, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, sure, Americans can. I mean, well, technically, I guess you can register it yourself on the Secretary of State's website. It's generally a pretty terrible idea to do that because most people make a lot of mistakes there. Being a tax lawyer, I've seen countless mistakes people make, and they think, "Oh,
Mm.
I'm just going to do it myself. Do it yourself is cheap. I'll save the $100 or $200 or whatever." And to me, that's the most silly thing you could possibly do because you're literally starting a company to provide for you and your family to build this significant asset that's supposed to be super important,
Uh-huh.
and and your roadblock is spending an extra $200 like to do it in the right way. Like that's crazy to me. Like people do it all the time. People are like, no, I don't want to pay that $200 a year for somebody to handle that, but people do what they want to do. But you're right; they can go anywhere. Um, maybe it's like what's the one you mentioned, Wyoming agents or something like that. But um, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to go. And no disparaging to that company.
I don't even
I
think
don't
it's a
really
real
know
company.
anything
I just
about
made it up. There's something like that. But yeah, I get it.
it. I think there is something
There is one like
named
that.
some.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, let me ask you a couple quick questions just
Yeah,
to
sure.
set the foundation or the framing of the conversation a little bit. So you have another one that's globalwealthprotection.com.
Yep.
That's the business that you referenced. That's kind of like the larger business or the original business, and then Business Anywhere is kind of an offshoot.
Global Wealth Protection is the older business, but Business Anywhere now is much larger.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Business Anywhere was a spinoff because we were doing a lot of consulting for clients who, like Americans living in Mexico with an e-commerce business, Canadians living in Thailand with, a software company, or a German who's traveling all over the world with no home base with a coaching business or something. And so very often we were referring people to register an LLC in somewhere, Wyoming or Delaware or Florida or whatever. And I just got tired of referring out to other partners, so I started the company. But it has now become a much larger business than the the consulting business.
That's cool. I want to come back to that, like what made it bigger, what you've done well and stuff, because I feel like it is a pretty competitive niche. But a couple more kind of foundational questions first. When you say that you're an international tax lawyer, what does that mean?
Um, well, I mean, I do consulting with clients. So just to give an example, you got a Canadian from Toronto who decides they want to exit Canada, and they have a company doing, let's say, a software company, like a SaaS business, for example, and
Yep.
they want to be kind of, let's say, digital nomad. So they want to live, maybe stay 3 months in Canada, maybe 6 months in Mexico, and 3 months in Argentina,
Yep.
and they need so right there, you've got Canada, Argentina, and Mexico as three different jurisdictions to consider when it comes to strategic planning.
Yep.
And there's a lot of moving parts that go in there, and very often you have legal conflicts between countries. So there's a lot of moving parts. Number one, how to exit the Canadian tax system, how and where to register your company in the right jurisdiction that makes things easier
Mhm.
and more simplified and tax efficient for you, how to avoid becoming a tax resident in other countries you're spending time, or, I mean, if you're going to base there, how to be a tax resident there and optimize, based
Mhm.
on that tax situation. So my role is to help them find these more complex strategies because you've got multiple countries at play, multiple company structures in play. So
Totally, totally. Tell me this: Are you on Twitter? Are you on X?
I am. Yep. We have a
And I'm not
Business
sure if you've
Anywhere
seen
account
it.
on Twitter.
Yeah, I believe I've seen it. I believe I follow you guys. I'm not sure if you've seen, but this is something we talk about a lot on Twitter, and there's other sort of similar sort of international tax slash migration consultants, but there's not a lot of voices on Twitter in our corner of Twitter that are actually lawyers or that actually work for let's just say a big four accounting firm or something that sort of bring that authority. And so I think a lot of people have a little bit of skepticism that it's even possible to get to zero tax. Like for the non Americans, obviously American citizenship based taxation, but for the Australians, the Canadians, the Europeans, it's such a new concept and paradigm for them, the idea that they can leave their tax system, they can set up a pass-through entity, they could become a tax resident of, say, a territorial tax country like a Panama or whatever, and they could potentially structure themselves to pay 0% tax. Could you speak to that a bit?
Sure. So one comment I'll make, you mentioned before, like Big Four. So Big Four, like Deloitte or something like that. Small, like a freelancer or a small or mid-sized business owner is not going to be a client of Deloitte.
Right.
I
No,
mean,
obviously, I get it.
you can't afford Deloitte. Like
Yes.
that's way out of range for you. And so the problem here is that the big four, like you mentioned, or even some of the big regional ones that deal with these types of issues, they only deal with big companies.
Yeah.
There's not that many people that specialize in the small business owners and the entrepreneurs and the solopreneurs.
Mhm.
And the reality is, it's because it's a relatively small and a relatively new niche. I mean, it is massively growing, but like this niche really didn't exist at all before 2003. So Skype was invented in 2003, which opened up the world of communication
Mhm.
that a small business owner couldn't afford before. Like in the
Yep.
year 2000, if you decided to go be quote digital nomad, I mean, you could easily have a five, six, $7,000 monthly cell phone bill or more,
Yeah.
and that's not really feasible if you have like this small business or solopreneur. Skype opened the world up for that to allow lower cost um, communication. And then, of course, we had Tim Ferriss wrote the 4 Hour Work Week in 2007, which became kind of the digital nomad Bible.
Mhm.
He didn't even coin that term back then. He called it geo arbitrage. But
Yep.
um, it's 20 years is kind of the window of this lifestyle has legitimately existed in a larger space. And so there's not a lot of people that talk to that audience because it's new and it's not that big. And to your point, yeah, like most of the time, and depending on the nationality too, like Canadians especially is one of them. But you tell them, yeah, you can totally live tax free if you structured your life correctly, and they're like, yeah, that's not possible. I had a client one time, about a year ago. Our first, not exaggerating, so all my consultation calls with clients on the consulting side are 1 hour.
Mhm.
My first 6 calls with her were convincing her that it was legal for her to not pay tax in Canada if she didn't live there. We
Mhm.
spent literally 6 hours on the phone of me going through the Canadian government website, showing her how she could exit the Canadian. She just couldn't. She didn't believe it. Like
Mhm.
it was such a crazy thing. But yeah, I mean, every nationality is a little bit different on the checklist of things you need to do to exit that tax
Yep.
system. Like Canada is not that difficult, but there's 3 primary connecting factors that you've got to disconnect from, and then there's some secondary factors, and there's a few other things you got to do, and then you got to file a final tax return telling them you've gone and stuff like that.
Yep.
Whereas you got countries like Australia, it's a little bit different. Australia, you actually have to move to, you have to become a tax resident.
Yep.
in another country. Whereas Canada, you don't have to do that. Australia, you have to. But like my Australian clients that want to be tax free, I would tell them to move to, like, I don't know, you can do like a Panama or
Paraguay.
Paraguay or something like that. Um, or if you don't want to do that, I tell them to move to a country and become a tax resident, like, I don't know, the UK, for
Right.
example, for 1 year, but then exit the UK
Yes.
after one
We call
year.
this the two-step. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, basically. And so it's pretty easy to exit the UK tax system. And it's easy for Australians to become residents in the UK. Yeah, it takes an extra year to get it done. So it depends on the nationality of the client. You got like Finnish people have a 4 year rule.
Yeah.
Swedish people have to do a lot of specific things. Like Germans, it's ridiculously easy. Like you literally just deregister your address and, adios, right?
Totally.
So it depends. And Americans, of course, are the most complicated. I mean, you can't really give up
Right.
your
It's
tax
a different
residency.
ballgame. But it's just good to hear from another voice in the industry that's not really a big Twitter guy. That's, that this is possible. And, just good to hear from a voice of authority like yourself, Bobby. It's like, yes, it's possible to change your tax residency, become a resident of a more favorable jurisdiction, set up a US LLC and offshore banking, and you can structure things to get to, zero tax.
Well, it's also possible to not be a tax resident. Like that is also possible to avoid tax residency. I mean, there are trade-offs and compromises to be made. And again, it depends on your nationality. Like a Canadian, for example, can exit Canada without becoming a tax resident.
Mhm.
There are compromises and there are trade-offs, but it is possible. So I have a lot of clients that have chosen that path because they just don't want to deal with any of it.
Mhm.
But I mean, that creates a different set of circumstances for them.
Yeah. But
Personally,
it's
I think
really
it's
like
easier.
solidifies it, right, to get a tax residency.
Well, I mean, it solidifies it in the sense that you have another place to call, quote, tax home. But from the sense, is it legally required? If using Canadians, for example, if you exit Canada, you don't legally need to become a tax resident unless you're going to maintain some of your primary residential factors.
Mm.
Um, so Canada, there's two ways to exit. Basically, you basically cut all ties. You give up your primary home. Your spouse and dependents all are no longer Canadian tax residents. Everyone's gone, basically. That's the big thing. If you want to maintain one of your primary residential factors, like let's say you want to keep your house in Canada. Well, if you want to keep your house in Canada, then you're required to become a tax resident somewhere else in a country that has a tax treaty with Canada. So it depends on what your goal is. Like if you're like, no, I absolutely love my house, I don't want to give it up, then you do absolutely need to become a tax resident somewhere else in a country that has a tax treaty with Canada
Yeah.
in order to make that full disconnect. But if you sell your house and you're single or your spouse and kids move with you, there's nothing that prohibits you from giving that up and not becoming a tax resident somewhere else. You
Mhm.
can do it. And the next question I always get from people, but what happens if I move back to Canada 10 years later and
Mhm.
won't they want to know where I've been? No, they don't, because if you exited correctly in the beginning and you filed your final tax return, you told them your date of exit and you did everything correctly, they don't even have the legal right to ask you where you've been.
Mhm.
That's Canada, by the way. Now, Finland, it's
Yeah.
different.
I get it.
Australia, it's different.
I get it. Yeah, if we won't have enough time if we keep going into all the individual countries.
Sure.
Because we only have like whatever
Yeah,
15,
yeah.
20 minutes left. Um, so you, as an American, how did you get into all this? Like, what's got you nerding out on other countries' tax systems? As an American, you don't have to worry about any of this, right? Because for me, I'm a dual citizen. So I was born in Canada, but my one of my parents is American, so I inherited a U.S. passport.
Right.
So like I kind of understand both things, as I understand the U.S. stuff and I understand the international stuff. How did you get into this?
So I grew up so my dad was by trade, he was an accountant, but he was an entrepreneur. He had a couple of different businesses. And just my upbringing, like literally sitting around the dinner table at 13 years old, we would talk about like tax optimization and tax
In,
write-offs
right. But in the
and
US, yeah.
S-Corps. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that mindset, like it always, my mindset was always like business and tax optimization. Like even when I started my first business at 19, like I was thinking like the best way to optimize this for taxes to pay, the least amount of taxes as possible, stuff like that. And I just in my late 20s, I had a couple of different businesses. I had an installation company, owned a restaurant, I had a real estate business, and I hired somebody like me to kind of help me with my situation.
Mhm.
And I became fascinated with that process of doing that. And so all my friends were all entrepreneurs. And I went to this guy and I said, look, I got a bunch of buddies that are in my kind of same boat. Why don't we work together helping, some of my buddies?
Mhm.
And so from that point, that became kind of a side gig for me to help people do the same thing. And then it just kind of developed over time. And then I traveled more and more, became more and more involved in international stuff, living abroad. I mean, at this point, I've lived in, I think, 11 different countries. I've been to like
Cool.
80 plus countries. I also own a trust company in the Caribbean. We're a licensed
Mhm.
trust company in the Caribbean. And I just got really heavily involved in that because from the asset protection side and international planning, offshore was always kind of a component,
Yeah,
especially for,
totally.
nomadic people and expats. And so it's just one of those things. You go down a rabbit hole and you're like, man, that's pretty cool. Let's learn more about that. And so studied it and became intrigued with it.
Dude, can you come back every month? And one episode we do trust, one episode we do this and that.
Sure, why not?
I feel
Yeah.
like you got a lot of stories, and there's a lot of directions we could take some of these conversations. So I know today you wanted to talk a bit more about business anywhere and sort of LLC formations, and I think what's also very related to LLC formations is address, physical address in the U.S. And I
Yeah.
think I think you mentioned a little bit of that. There's a couple elements to it, right? For non-Americans, is you spin up the LLC, you get the EIN. That's pretty easy, but it's actually getting much much harder in the past 6 months, in the past years. I'm sure you're aware, to get Mercury, to get to get big banks allowing you to open an account without having substance, without having a good physical address, one that's not a mail forwarder, and so forth. Could you speak to that a little bit and how that all intermingles?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the address thing is a big topic now. Not only for non-U.S. people, but I mean also Americans who are expats or digital nomads. I mean,
Yep.
like what a lot of people like from the American perspective, what most Americans do, like, oh well, I used to live at 123 Main Street. Let's just keep that address
Yep.
kind of on paper.
Yep.
So Americans kind of a little bit have that advantage because at one point they had a utility bill that pointed at 123 Main Street, or they had a personal account at Bank of America that pointed at 123 Main Street in Springfield, Illinois, or whatever.
Yep.
Um, Non-Americans, it becomes a little bit trickier because they can't just like easily produce a utility bill or a Bank of America bank statement. So there's a couple of things, couple of factors here. Number one is the Postal Service now has database. The U.S. Postal Service has databases for all registered agents in the U.S. So they're called CRAs, or commercial registered agents.
Mhm.
So there's a USPS database for all CRAs. So if you are a um, like a registered commercial registered agent, like you have the legal authority to be a commercial registered agent, your address is in that Postal Service database. Um, if that makes sense. Uh, Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries. I just muted your mic, but I think you have to unmute it. It's not letting me unmute. No, but even as an
There we go.
American, which
Okay.
I am, I've had to deal with this too, where I've used, you've probably heard of Escapees and
Yep.
a couple of these companies that are like RV parks and this and that for an address.
Yep.
I've used multiple of them. And it's like sometimes, sometimes it works for like a year or two and then it kind of stops working. And so I was
Yeah.
able to open up credit cards with an address before, but now I can't get any new cards with that address. And so you're right that even for Americans, it's kind of a moving target.
It's a shuffle. So it's a shuffle. So you've got these commercial registered agents, the CRAs, in the database, in this postal service database. So now whenever you go open a bank account, they match that. Now they have this database. They match the address in the database, and they do not allow you to use the registered agent as your physical address. So when it comes to opening bank accounts, you have three addresses now that are for your business. Sorry, if you're opening a business bank account, you have three addresses that are necessary. One is your registered agent address because that is your legal address.
Hmm.
So a registered agent provides a service. They are the legal address for your company in that state to
Hmm.
receive official mail from the Secretary of State, the tax office, the Department of Revenue, and any what you call SOP mail or service of process mail, signed for mail.
Hmm.
So that's the role that a commercial registered agent or registered agent serves. And if you register a company in the US in any state, you have to have a registered address or registered agent in that state. Well, the quote do it yourselfers, which is a terrible idea, but the do it yourselfers, they're from Des Moines, Iowa, and they use, oh, I'll just use my home address. And then that puts their name and their home address permanently in public record, which is a really, really, really horrible idea from a privacy standpoint. Um, that's why you always should use a commercial registered agent in some way to,
Hmm.
from a privacy standpoint. If you're a non-U.S. person, you don't have a choice because you have to use a commercial registered agent. But people get confused on this. I mean, we've wrote countless blogs. We've done videos on this subject countless times. But you can't use a commercial registered agent address as your physical address.
Right.
So the next address you need to open a bank account in the US is a mailing address.
Hmm.
Okay? Some mailing address where you can receive actual mail correspondence, like a
Yeah.
bank statement or a credit card or whatever. That's got to be in the US. If you're from Pakistan, Bank of America is not going to mail you your debit card to Pakistan. They're just not going to. Okay? Because they need from a regulatory standpoint, they can only correspond with, US locations. Sometimes that mailing address can also be your physical address. More often, it can't. So if you're using your home address as your mailing address, then yeah, you probably can make that your physical address. Or if you have an office address, like an actual physical office, like where you have a desk and everything, you can do that. And then the third address you need to have for opening a bank account for that company is a physical address. But in most cases, the banks now are allowing you to use a foreign address. So if
Mm.
using Pakistan again, if you've got any utility bill or a bank statement that can verify you physically are connected to that address, you can use that. So in that scenario, you need the LLC with your registered agent address, your
Hmm.
legal address. You can get a virtual mailbox in the US, mailing address, and then you use the address you can verify where you physically sit in Pakistan. In most cases, that's fine.
Hmm.
But a lot of people get hung up and they think, oh, no, I have to have a US physical address. In most cases, no. Now, some of your like brick and mortar banks, they do require that also to be a physical address in the US. But there's so many um, online banks or fintech platforms now that you can use that don't require that physical address in the US.
It's definitely
That it,
whack-a-mole, but yeah.
yeah, but it's not that hard if you understand what you're doing. You need the virtual mailbox address for mailing. You need the registered agent address for your legal address, and you need to prove where you physically sit when you do your work. Or you need to have some type of verification of where you presumably sit, whether it's a bank statement somewhere or a utility bill or something like that. But in most cases, most of those banks will accept non-U.S. addresses for that thing. I mean, some of your brick and mortars will accept it. I know now, like I've recently had some clients open Chase accounts using non-U.S. addresses, like Chase business accounts, but they still have the mailing and the registered agent address in the U.S. Um, so it's not as difficult as people make it seem, but I think people make it hard on themselves because they're trying to find a physical address in the US, and that's the thing that becomes the whack-a-mole. So like you said, you're like you think you need a physical address in the US, so you go get this like RV park address,
Mhm.
and that works for 6 months, and now all of a sudden that RV park address is now on the other database, which is what's called the CMRA database, which is the Commercial Mail Receiving Agent database. That's what all your virtual mailbox providers are on.
Yeah.
And 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 I want to make it clear, all of your virtual mailbox providers' addresses are on the Postal Service CMRA database. All of them.
Yes.
If their address is not on the CMRA database, you're going to be playing whack-a-mole again because they're not actually a legitimate virtual mailbox provider. Because to be a CMRA, commercial mail receiving agent, it must be a commercial address. It can't be somebody's apartment in Des Moines, Iowa, or somebody that owns a house in, Paducah, Kentucky. You can't like it can't be a legitimate CMRA. And so I know there are people popping up going, "We'll be your CMRA," because their address doesn't pop up in that USPS database, but they're going to get shut down pretty quickly because they don't meet the requirements to actually be a commercial mail receiving agent.
Yes. I'm yeah, it's I'm like torn because I want to go in the weeds, but it's like I also want to, cover a little bit of ground in the episode with the time we
Yeah,
have left. But obviously there's going to be a link in the description where people can go to the website, check out the YouTube and go into more details about this stuff. I'm super fascinated about it, but I want to cover a little bit more ground here.
sure.
Um, so one thing that's gotten increasingly popular, I feel like in the past 6 to 12 months, is essentially creating a multi-level structure, sort of like a holding company, or especially for the non-Americans, having like a foundation or a trust or offshore company own that US LLC. Now, I know you obviously know a little bit about this stuff if you have a trust company in the Caribbean. Um, what are you seeing in terms of having maybe a Panama foundation or a Swiss foundation own that US LLC? Is that doable? Is obviously it's doable, but like, is that making things a lot more complicated? What are your suggestions for some of that stuff?
It's doable, but it depends on the goal you're trying to accomplish by having a trust or a foundation own your LLC. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Like Mexico is an interesting example, and I know like you're dealing with a lot of Latin America. So Mexico is an interesting example. Obviously, there's tons of Americans and Canadians that move to Mexico, either as snowbirds or retirees, or they just want to live on the beach. Um, so Mexico is an interesting example. They're not a territorial tax system.
Mhm.
However, it's extremely difficult to actually become a tax resident in Mexico unless you actually are working in Mexico.
Right.
Like you
It's
have
like
a business there.
you have a center of life test. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the Center of Vital Interest test. So unless you actually have a job there, a business there, or you're freelancing physically in Mexico, it's difficult to actually become a tax resident. So you can get physical residency, like a residence permit, temporary
Yep.
or permanent residency,
Yep. That's what we
and
do.
be a physical resident without being a tax resident. in
Yep.
Mexico, which is kind of an interesting option. I mentioned before, you can actually not have tax residency anywhere.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of, you know, Canadians and Americans that are doing that in Mexico. But the nuance there with Mexico is if you earn more than half of your income from Mexican sources, you become a tax resident in Mexico.
Hmm.
And if you're freelancing or you have a US LLC that's a pass through entity, that means you physically are earning that money while residing in
Because you're
Mexico as a
performing the
resident.
work.
And that means you actually earn more than half of your income from Mexican sources because you're physically sitting there. So Mexico is a good example of where having a holding company makes sense. So you create a holding company in another jurisdiction, and then you pay yourself a dividend from the
Hmm.
holding company from the Mexican perspective. So if the Mexican tax office ever comes knocking, you're like, no, I earn all my income from dividends of this company outside of Mexico.
Hmm.
In that scenario, having an offshore holding company makes a lot of sense,
Hmm.
but a trust or a foundation doesn't do anything for you in that scenario. Foundation, uh, maybe if you structured the foundation in such a way where it had commercial intent, but a foundation is much more complex and much more expensive to set up than an offshore holding company. So if your purpose is commercial intent, it doesn't make sense to do a foundation. It's easier to just do an offshore company.
Hmm.
Um, Foundations are kind of a foundation is essentially the civil law equivalent to a trust. It was created, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
60, 70 years ago, maybe in Europe to create the roughly the equivalent of a trust because in
They don't
civil law
recognize.
jurisdictions they don't recognize
Yeah.
uh, or trust. They don't recognize foundations. So, like for all intents and purposes, a foundation functionally operates like a trust, which basically the intent and purpose of a trust is asset protection and estate planning.
Hmm.
So a trust doesn't really give you that tax optimization benefit or income tax optimization benefit like having that holding company does. But having a trust or a foundation own your company can be very beneficial from an asset protection standpoint, an estate planning standpoint, a privacy standpoint. I mean, there's huge advantages to it, but it's
Totally.
got to be based on whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think the asset protection is one of the big things that people are going for as part of
Yep.
it. Um, so are you seeing, like, is that something that you try to push for with clients where you say, hey, let's try to get this stuff out of your name and it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Well, I mean, I'm always a big believer in owning nothing in your own
Yes.
name anyway. Like,
Right.
um, pretty much anything of value you should never own in your own name. Like,
Hmm.
even even like cash bank accounts. Like, if you like me personally in the states, my personal cash bank account never has more than a few $1,000s in it. All my excess cash stays in an LLC bank account somewhere.
Mm.
Even my investment brokerage accounts, they're never in my own name.
Mm.
Any investments, real estate, it's always in some other entity's name. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And having an LLC, like let's say you have just to simplify, let's say you own a piece of valuable real estate that's worth a couple $1,000,000 and you own it in an LLC. So from an asset protection standpoint, that's pretty good. But having that LLC owned by a trust or a private interest foundation is infinitely better because, from a legal perspective, you no longer own it. If
Right.
it's in an LLC, you still own the LLC. So if you're ever sued for
Exactly.
$2,000,000 in discovery, you're going to be asked, "Do you own anything?" Yes, I own this LLC, and you know. But in a trust or foundation, when you go through the discovery process, they ask, "Do you own anything?" You say no. Of course, they're going to ask, "Are you the settlor or beneficiary of a trust?" You're going to say yes. But then, if the trust or foundation is properly structured, then it's untouchable
You
anyway.
can't pierce. This is called piercing the veil.
Yeah, it's untouchable. So,
I'm very
so
fascinated by this idea because this is something that was previously only available to, high net worth individuals. And I feel like with businesses like yours and information like what we do, we're actually kind of democratizing this and making it more available for regular people.
I mean, setting up a trust or a foundation is not a cheap thing to do if it's done correctly, but it's definitely not as expensive as people think it is. Like, I had a client a couple of years ago came to me, and his net worth was like $50 million, and we were talking about a trust, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I don't think I'm at the asset level where that makes sense." And I'm like, "What are you talking about, man? Your like net worth is 50 million bucks. Like, you're 100% at the level where this makes sense."
Yeah.
But on the flip side, like I have people with net worth under $1 million that set up trust because it costs a decent amount of money, but like it's not out of reach for people, of let's say upper middle class, wealth.
Totally. I think it's fascinating. I love what you're doing. I think the range of services that you're providing is insane. Do you ever feel like you're doing too much stuff, or like it's a
All
lot
the
of it's a
time.
lot to cover. It's a lot to cover. I know
Well,
how you.
I have three different companies, and I have teams that manage all three companies. So, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so it's not like it's just me. So I have
No,
teams
totally,
running
totally, totally.
everything.
Dude, we got to talk offline. We also got to have you back on the podcast. Your phone's blowing up. I got to run to a soccer game. Where can
Nice.
people find you? We'll obviously put the link in the description, the affiliate link as well and everything. But where can people find you? Final message for the audience.
The best way to reach us, it's businessanywhere.io. That's our kind of main company. And we have contact forms there. You can schedule consultations there. We got a chat function on there. So that's easy to reach us there. We also have a YouTube channel, Business Anywhere IO YouTube channel. If you're more like you need like ongoing support for like bigger structuring, that would be globalwealthprotection.com.
Amazing. I'm subscribed to the YouTube channel. Everyone else should as well. This is all we have time for today. Again, our guest today, Bobby Casey from globalwealthprotection.com and businessanywhere.io. Link in the description to go find Bobby. And for the audience, please subscribe to the My Latin Life podcast as well, wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You can also book a call with us at the Calendly link in the description to get the process started and start taking action on some of the things we've been talking about today. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao for now.
Thanks for having me.